Oh my god.
Oh, look at this truck. Oh, fuck, dude, it's deep as fuck. That shit almost took me. This guy's fucked.
It was supposed to be a normal winter weekend in California. Kids were heading to soccer practice. Couples were talking about brunch plans. Joggers followed their usual routes along the bay, pausing to snap photos of waves brushing the seawall. Nothing felt out of place. The sky was gray. The air was damp. Light rain had been coming and going for days. Just another typical coastal winter morning. And then, slowly, the water started rising. At first, it didn't feel urgent. Small puddles formed near storm drains. Sidewalks looked wet, but manageable. Then those puddles spread. Water crept across intersections. Waves rolled in higher than usual, spilling over walkways where tourists normally stand for pictures. Within hours, the calm weekend routine vanished. Families rushed to move cars. Neighbors stacked sandbags. People checked on each other as streets quietly disappeared underwater. Traffic didn't stop because of accidents or congestion. It stopped because the road itself was gone. The conditions couldn't have lined up worse. Days of steady rain had soaked the ground, leaving nowhere for water to drain. At the same time, king tides pushed the Pacific farther inland than most people had ever seen. Places that always felt safe suddenly weren't. Garages filled with water. Parking lots vanished. Familiar routes became impassable. And that's when it hit people, this wasn't just a little flooding. This was the ocean reminding everyone how close it really is. From San Francisco's waterfront to quiet neighborhoods in Marin County, weekend plans were washed away and replaced with a much heavier thought. If this can happen on a normal winter weekend, what happens next time? The real turning point didn't come with a dramatic wave or a loud crash. It came through small, ordinary decisions. Some residents saw water collecting near the curb and assumed it would drain like it always had. Others stuck to their plans, running errands, driving to activities, figuring the worst was already over. But the water kept rising. And by the time it was impossible to ignore, many people realized something unsettling. This wasn't a rare fluke. It was a preview, a quiet warning delivered on what was supposed to be just another ordinary weekend. But as the hours passed, the warning signs started stacking up. Tide forecasts showed peak levels approaching late morning. Weather radar lit up with bands of steady, relentless rain pushing onshore. And by the time many people connected the dots, rain runoff, fully saturated ground, and king tides hitting at the same moment, it was already too late to call it just another wet day. Across the Bay Area, the change happened almost hour by hour. At first, water collected quietly in gutters, ditches, and creeks. Then it spilled into parking lots. Then it reached front steps. In low-lying neighborhoods, people began lifting boxes, moving cars to slightly higher streets, and constantly refreshing emergency alerts on their phones. Emergency dispatch centers started lighting up with call after call. Reports of stalled vehicles, flooded intersections, water flowing across roads that had never flooded in previous storms. Traffic maps turned red, not because of crashes, but because roads were simply closing. By late morning, the normal rhythm of the day had completely broken. Coffee shops emptied as customers rushed home. Youth sports games were canceled halfway through warm-ups. Commuters turned around, not because of heavy rain, but because entire lanes had vanished beneath incoming water. What began as a routine coastal winter storm had turned into something much bigger, a perfectly timed event created by weather and tide, unfolding in real time while millions of people were still trying to live their normal lives. As the morning slid into midday, the water stopped creeping. It advanced. In community after community, it seemed to arrive from every direction at once. Rain fell from above. Runoff poured down from the hills, and the bay surged from below, pushing farther inland with every passing minute. In Marin County, places like Mill Valley, Corte Madera, and Larkspur, residents watched familiar streets transform completely. Curbs disappeared. Road markings faded. Even street signs seemed to shrink as the water climbed higher around them. By then, it was clear. This wasn't just flooding. It was a system pushing past its limits. In some neighborhoods, the only clue that a road had ever been there was the tops of mailboxes and the faint outlines of cars sitting underwater. In places like Larkspur's marina area, the flooding was especially striking. What's normally a calm, scenic layout of canals quickly turned into a chain of temporary lakes, blending directly into the rising bay. Parking garages and ground-level storage spaces filled first, then driveways, then side yards. Parents carried children through knee-deep water just to reach higher ground. Some residents pulled out paddleboards and kayaks, not for fun, but because they had become the easiest way to move around their own neighborhood. At the same time, major roadways across the region began failing one after another. Sections of State Route 37 were shut down as water covered entire lanes near key interchanges. Deputies and rescue crews responded to stalled vehicles stranded in feet of water, helping drivers escape before conditions worsened. Even when the rain briefly let up, the flooding didn't. The tides were still rising, pushing water inland long after the clouds began to break. What shocked many people wasn't just how high the water reached, it was how fast normal life vanished. Within hours, everyday routines were replaced by evacuation plans, emergency alerts, and the uncomfortable realization that the ocean was no longer somewhere in the distance. It was right here. As neighborhoods filled with water, the science behind the event became impossible to ignore. Meteorologists had warned that this weekend would bring king tides, the highest tides of the year, caused when the gravitational pull of the moon and sun align and lift ocean levels far beyond normal. Usually, king tides are something people photograph, not fear. Families walk along the shoreline, watch waves roll a little higher than usual, snap a few pictures, and head home. But this time, the king tides didn't arrive on their own. They arrived on top of days of heavy rain, fully saturated soil, and creeks and bays that were already swollen. The ground had reached its limit. There was nowhere left for the water to go. And when that happens, the landscape changes fast. Drainage systems were already running at full capacity. So every new drop, whether from the sky or from the incoming tide, had only one place left to go. Sideways, into streets, into neighborhoods, into homes. Strong onshore winds made things even worse. They acted like a giant hand, pushing water farther inland and slowing the natural ebb of the tide. Instead of pulling back, the water stayed pressed against the coastline, stacking higher with each passing wave. For people watching from porches and windows, the science became very simple. The water kept rising even when the rain briefly stopped. Experts pointed to a bigger issue behind the immediate chaos: rising sea levels. Year after year, the baseline of the ocean inches higher, allowing extreme tide events to reach places they never used to. What was once considered rare is now happening more often along America's coastlines. So while residents were lifting furniture onto shelves, checking on neighbors, or paddling through streets in kayaks, they were also facing a hard truth. This wasn't just bad luck. It was weather, tides, and a changing climate converging at the same moment, revealing how thin the line really is between land and ocean. The human impact unfolded in small, quiet moments that rarely make headlines, but defined disasters more than numbers ever could. Families stood in living rooms watching water creep across the floor, deciding what to save first. Photo albums, children's drawings, tools, holiday decorations packed in cardboard boxes. Parents explained to young kids why they couldn't play outside, even though the water looked like one giant puddle. Pets were carried through cold floodwater, confused as their familiar homes changed around them. In many neighborhoods, the first response wasn't panic. It was connection. Neighbors knocked on doors to check on elderly residents. Teenagers formed quick bucket lines to move sandbags. People with trucks or high-clearance vehicles offered rides to drier streets. Social media filled with offers of spare rooms, hot meals, dry clothes, and phone chargers. The sense of community wasn't loud or dramatic. It was steady, practical, and deeply human. Meanwhile, life plans were rewritten in real time. Weddings were postponed. Birthday parties canceled. Weekend trips abandoned. Workers called in to say they couldn't make it. not because of traffic, but because the road itself was underwater. Some families slept in their living rooms that night, one ear open, listening for the sound of water returning in the dark. Others couldn't sleep at all. They stayed awake, refreshing tide charts on their phones, watching the numbers rise and fall like a heartbeat they had no control over. For longtime Bay Area residents, the emotional impact was just as real as the physical damage. People here are used to fog, earthquakes, power outages, even wildfires. But not this. Watching the ocean push this far inland challenged a quiet assumption many people carry, that the line between land and water is fixed. This storm made it clear just how temporary that boundary can be. While communities were responding on the ground, emergency crews across California were stretched thin. Swiftwater rescue teams moved through flooded corridors, checking stranded vehicles one by one. Firefighters waded through waist-deep water with safety lines tied around them, guiding people toward higher ground. Law enforcement closed roads not to slow traffic, but because the pavement underneath the water was no longer visible, or, in some cases, no longer stable. In Southern California, heavy rain triggered landslides along steep hillsides, blocking highways and trapping travelers. In one incident, a man was swept into a creek during the storm and did not survive. A painful reminder that even shallow, fast-moving water can be deadly. And even after the highest tide passed, the danger didn't disappear. Meteorologists warned that more rain was on the way. With soil already saturated and drainage systems overwhelmed, it wouldn't take much to trigger renewed flooding or additional landslides. Flood warnings remained in place, and residents were urged to avoid driving at night, when it's nearly impossible to judge the depth or speed of water covering the road. Yet even as sirens echoed and water continued to rise, stories of resilience began to surface. Neighbors shared generators when the power went out. People checked in on one another. And in the middle of uncertainty, communities found ways to hold together. Cafes offered free hot drinks to people who walked in soaked and shaken. Schools and churches opened their doors as temporary shelters. California, a place shaped by wildfires, earthquakes, and extremes, once again showed its ability to face disaster with a mix of practicality and compassion. Still, a larger question lingered, hanging in the air like the last of the storm clouds. If this is what happens when heavy rain and extreme tides collide today, what does the next decade look like as seas continue to rise and storms grow more intense? As floodwaters slowly recede, California is left with more than damaged roads and waterlogged neighborhoods. It's left with stories of parents carrying children through knee-deep water, of neighbors stepping in as first responders, and of communities realizing just how closely they are tied to the ocean that defines their coastline. Cleanup will take days, maybe weeks, but the bigger conversation is only beginning. Events like this force us to look beyond a single storm. They raise hard questions about how our cities are built, how resilient our infrastructure really is, and how often scenes like this may repeat in the future. For many people, this flood changed how they look at the map, not as a fixed line between land and sea, but as a moving boundary that shifts with every tide and every storm. Now we want to hear from you. Do you see this as an unlucky combination of weather and tides? Or is it a sign that America's coastal communities are entering a new era of risk? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this video helped you better understand what's happening in California, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. It only takes a moment, but it helps these stories reach people who may be facing the same dangers. Thanks for watching, and stay safe.